The dodo bird, Rhaphis cuculetus, a now extinct flightless bird, holds a unique place in the annals of natural history as a symbol of human-driven extinction and a testament to the fragility of isolated ecosystems. Native exclusively to Mauritius, a small volcanic island in the Indian Ocean, the dodo was a peculiar creature that captured the imagination of early explorers and continues to fascinate scientists, conservationists, and the public alike. Standing approximately 1 meter tall, with a plump body, tiny vestigial wings, a robust beak, and sturdy legs, the dodo was unlike any bird encountered by European sailors in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Its awkward appearance, coupled with its apparent lack of fear toward humans, made it an easy target for exploitation and contributed to its rapid demise. Yet, the dodo's story is far more than a cautionary tale of extinction. It is a window into evolutionary biology, island ecology, and the profound consequences of human exploration. The dodo's fame extends beyond its biological existence, cemented in popular culture through literature, art, and even language. The phrase, "dead as a dodo," has become synonymous with obsolescence. While Lewis Carroll's inclusion of a dodo in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland immortalized the bird as a quirky, almost mythical figure, however, the dodo was very real, a product of millions of years of evolution in isolation, perfectly adapted to its environment until the arrival of humans disrupted its world. This chapter introduces the dodo's story, exploring its significance, the historical context of its discovery, and the scientific efforts to understand its life and loss. The dodo's home, Mauritius, is part of the Mascarene Islands, a remote archipelago formed by volcanic activity millions of years ago. Located approximately 2,000 kilometers east of mainland Africa, Mauritius was a paradise of dense forests, diverse plant life, and unique wildlife, untouched by humans until the late 16th century. The dodo evolved in this isolated environment, free from mammalian predators, which allowed it to develop its distinctive traits. Its closest relatives, as confirmed by modern genetic studies, are pigeons and doves, particularly the Nicobar pigeon, Caloenas nicobarica, which shares a common ancestor. This evolutionary lineage highlights the remarkable adaptability of avian species when faced with unique ecological niches. When European explorers, primarily Portuguese and Dutch sailors, first arrived in Mauritius in the late 1500s, they encountered a bird unlike any they had seen before. Historical accounts describe the dodo as a large, slow-moving creature with a peculiar, almost comical appearance. Its feathers were described as grayish or brownish, with a tuft of curly feathers at its tail, and its beak was large and hooked, ideal for cracking open tough fruits or seeds. Sailors noted the dodo's lack of fear, which allowed them to approach and capture the birds with ease. These early descriptions, often exaggerated or biased by the lens of European curiosity, painted the dodo as a clumsy, unintelligent creature, an unfair characterization that has persisted in popular imagination, but belies the bird's successful adaptation to its environment. The dodo's extinction, which occurred within a century of its discovery by Europeans, is one of the most well-documented cases of human-induced species loss. By the late 17th century, the dodo had vanished, with the last widely accepted sighting recorded around the 1660s. The rapid decline was driven by a combination of factors: direct hunting by sailors, who found the dodo an easy source of fresh meat; the introduction of invasive species such as rats, pigs, and monkeys, which preyed on dodo eggs and competed for resources; and the destruction of Mauritius forests for agriculture and settlement. This confluence of pressures overwhelmed the dodo, which had evolved in an environment without such threats and lacked the behavioral or physical adaptations to cope. Scientific interest in the dodo has grown significantly since its extinction, driven by a desire to understand its biology and the lessons its loss offers for conservation. While no complete dodo specimens exist, subfossil remains, bones, skulls, and partial skeletons discovered in Mauritius Mare, Osange's swamp, have provided valuable insights. These remains, combined with historical sketches and accounts from sailors, have allowed researchers to reconstruct the dodo's appearance and lifestyle. In the 21st century, advances in genetic analysis have clarified its evolutionary relationships, confirming its place within the Columbidae family, pigeons and doves. Such studies have also fueled speculative discussions about extinction. though the feasibility of reviving the dodo remains a distant prospect. The dodo story is not just a scientific curiosity, but a cultural and ecological touchstone. It serves as a stark reminder of the impact of human activities on fragile ecosystems, particularly those on islands where species often evolve in isolation. The dodo's extinction was not an isolated event. It was part of a broader pattern of biodiversity loss in the Mascarenes, where other species such as the Rodriguez solitaire also disappeared. Today, the dodo inspires conservation efforts, urging humanity to protect remaining endangered species and preserve ecosystems before they, too, become dead as a dodo. This book aims to unravel the dodo's story across 10 chapters, each delving into a facet of its existence, from its evolutionary origins to its cultural legacy. By examining the dodo's life, environment, and extinction, we can better understand the delicate balance of nature and the responsibility we bear to protect it. The dodo may be gone, but its story endures, offering lessons that resonate in an era of accelerating environmental change. The evolutionary journey of the dodo bird Rhaphis cuculitus is a remarkable tale of adaptation and survival, shaped by millions of years of isolation on the remote island of Mauritius. As a member of the Columbidae family, which includes pigeons and doves, the dodo's origins trace back to a common ancestor that likely possessed the ability to fly. This ancestor, a bird akin to modern pigeons, is believed to have colonized Mauritius millions of years ago, arriving on the island through long-distance dispersal across the Indian Ocean. The exact timeline of this colonization remains uncertain, but geological evidence suggests that Mauritius, formed by volcanic activity approximately 8 to 10 million years ago, provided a stable environment for such evolutionary processes to unfold. Upon reaching Mauritius, this ancestral bird encountered an environment vastly different from the mainland habitats of its relatives. The island was a lush, forested paradise, rich in vegetation and devoid of mammalian predators. This isolation was a critical factor in the dodo's evolution, as it allowed the species to diverge significantly from its flying forebears. In the absence of predators, the selective pressures that favored flight in mainland birds were absent, leading to a process known as evolutionary relaxation. Over countless generations, the dodo's ancestors gradually lost their ability to fly, a trait that became unnecessary in an environment where food was abundant on the ground and threats were minimal. This loss of flight is a classic example of evolutionary trade-offs seen in island species. Flight is energetically costly, requiring significant muscle mass and metabolic resources. On Mauritius, where food resources such as fruits, seeds, and possibly small invertebrates were readily available at ground level, the energy once allocated to flight could be redirected toward other traits, such as increased body size and stronger legs for terrestrial movement. This phenomenon, often referred to as island gigantism, is a hallmark of island evolution, and is observed in other species, such as the giant tortoises of the and the moa of New Zealand. The dodo's transformation into a flightless bird was thus a direct response to the ecological opportunities provided by its isolated habitat. Modern genetic studies have provided significant insights into the dodo's evolutionary lineage. By analyzing DNA extracted from subfossil remains, scientists have confirmed that the dodo is most closely related to the Nicobar pigeon Caloenus nicobartica, a colorful, fruit-eating pigeon found in Southeast Asia and nearby islands. This relationship suggests that the dodo's ancestor was likely a fruit-dispersing pigeon capable of long-distance flight, which allowed it to reach Mauritius. Over time, the dodo diverged from this ancestor, developing a robust body that could weigh between 10 and 20 kilograms and measure about 1 meter in height. Its wings, once functional for flight, became small and vestigial, serving little purpose beyond balance or display. The dodo's beak also underwent significant evolutionary changes, becoming large and hooked to suit its diet. Mauritius forests were rich in fruit-bearing trees, such as the Tambulocoque Sideroxylon grandiflorum, which produced hard-shelled fruits. The dodo's beak was well suited for cracking open these fruits or digging for seeds and roots, allowing it to exploit food sources inaccessible to smaller birds. This dietary specialization further reinforced the dodo's terrestrial lifestyle, as it had little need to fly in search of food. The evolutionary process that shaped the dodo was not instantaneous, but occurred over thousands to millions of years, driven by natural selection and genetic drift in a small, isolated population. The absence of predators meant that traits like speed or vigilance were less critical, allowing the dodo to develop a docile demeanor. This lack of fear, while advantageous in its predator-free environment, would later prove disastrous when humans and introduced species arrived. The dodo's evolutionary path also highlights the concept of niche specialization, where a species becomes finely tuned to its specific environment. In the case of the dodo, Mauritius' stable climate and abundant resources created an ideal niche for a large, flightless fruity bird. The dodo's closest relative in the mascarenes, the Rodriguez solitaire Peziphaps solitaria, provides further evidence of parallel evolution in the region. Like the dodo, the solitaire descended from a pigeon-like ancestor and evolved into a flightless bird on the nearby island of Rodriguez. The similarities between the two species underscore the powerful influence of island environments in driving convergent evolution, where unrelated species develop similar traits in response to similar ecological conditions. The dodo's evolutionary origins also raise intriguing questions about the broader history of the Columbidae family. Pigeons and doves are among the most widespread and adaptable bird families, with species found on every continent except Antarctica. Their ability to colonize remote islands and adapt to diverse environments speaks to their evolutionary resilience. The dodo, however, represents an extreme case of adaptation, where isolation led to a highly specialized form that was both uniquely successful and uniquely vulnerable. Its evolutionary story is a testament to the power of natural selection to shape life in unexpected ways, but also a reminder of how finely tuned adaptations can become liabilities when environments change rapidly. Understanding the dodo's evolutionary origins provides critical context for the rest of its story. Its transformation from a flying pigeon to a flightless island giant reflects the dynamic interplay between environment and biology. Yet this same isolation that allowed the dodo to thrive also left it unprepared for the arrival of humans and their associated disruptions. The following chapters will explore how the dodo's evolutionary adaptations shaped its life and behavior, and how its specialized traits ultimately contributed to its extinction. The phenomenon of island gigantism played a pivotal role in shaping the dodo bird Rhaphis cuculitis into the iconic creature it became, transforming a once flying pigeon-like ancestor into a large flightless bird perfectly suited to the unique conditions of Mauritius. Island gigantism is an evolutionary trend observed in many isolated ecosystems, where species tend to evolve larger body sizes compared to their mainland relatives. For the dodo, this process resulted in a bird that stood approximately 1 meter tall, weighed between 10 and 20 kilograms, and bore little resemblance to the nimble doves and pigeons from which it descended. This chapter explores the mechanisms and ecological factors behind island gigantism, the dodo's physical adaptations, and how these traits defined its existence on Mauritius. Island gigantism is a subset of the broader island rule, which describes how isolated environments, such as islands, drive unique evolutionary outcomes. On islands, where resources, predators, and competitors differ significantly from mainland ecosystems, species often undergo dramatic changes in size. Small species, like birds or rodents, may evolve larger bodies to exploit abundant resources or reduce competition, while larger species, like mammals, may become smaller due to limited resources, a phenomenon known as island dwarfism. For the dodo, the absence of mammalian predators and the availability of plentiful food sources on Mauritius created ideal conditions for gigantism. Over thousands to millions of years, the dodo's ancestors grew larger, their bodies adapting to a terrestrial lifestyle that no longer required the energy-intensive ability to fly. The dodo's increased body size was a direct response to Mauritius' ecological niche. The island's dense forests were rich in fruit-bearing trees, such as the Tambulacoque Sideroxylon grandiflorum, which produced large, hard-shelled fruits. A larger body allowed the dodo to consume a greater volume of food, giving it a competitive advantage in exploiting these resources. Additionally, in the absence of predators, there was little need for speed or agility, allowing the dodo to allocate energy toward growth rather than defense or escape mechanisms. This shift in energy allocation is a hallmark of island gigantism, where evolutionary pressures prioritize traits that maximize resource use over traits suited for survival in high-risk environments. One of the most striking outcomes of island gigantism in the dodo was the loss of flight. Flight is a costly adaptation, requiring strong pectoral muscles, lightweight bones, and significant metabolic energy. On Mauritius, where food was accessible on the ground and predators were absent, the evolutionary cost of maintaining flight outweighed its benefits. Over generations, the dodo's wings became vestigial small stubby structures that served no functional purpose for locomotion. These vestigial wings, often described in historical accounts as tiny and ineffective, were likely used for balance or, possibly, display behaviors during mating or social interactions. The reduction of wing size freed up resources for other adaptations, such as stronger legs and a more robust skeletal structure, which supported the dodo's terrestrial lifestyle. The dodo's legs, in contrast to its wings, became powerful and well-suited for walking and foraging. Subfossil remains, particularly those discovered in the Mare aux Singes swamp, reveal that the dodo had sturdy, thick leg bones capable of supporting its considerable weight. These legs allowed the dodo to move efficiently across the forest floor, navigating through dense vegetation to access food sources. Unlike the swift, agile movements of its pigeon ancestors, the dodo's gait was likely slow and deliberate, a reflection of its relaxed environment where speed was unnecessary. Early European accounts often described the dodo as clumsy or sluggish, but this perception likely stemmed from the bird's lack of fear and its adaptation to a low-energy lifestyle, rather than any inherent awkwardness. Another key adaptation driven by island gigantism was the dodo's large hooked beak. This feature was critical for its diet, which consisted primarily of fruits, seeds, and possibly small invertebrates or roots. The beak's robust structure allowed the dodo to crack open tough, fibrous fruits or dig into the soil, accessing food sources that smaller birds could not exploit. Some researchers hypothesized that the dodo played a significant ecological role as a seed disperser, particularly for trees like the tambula coke, whose seeds may have required passage through the dodo's digestive system to germinate effectively. While this hypothesis, known as the dodo tree mutualism, remains debated, it underscores the dodo's integration into Mauritius' ecosystem, where its physical adaptations shaped not only its survival, but also the island's plant life. The dodo's plumage, described in historical records as grayish or brownish, with a tuft of curly feathers at its tail, was another outcome of its evolutionary path. Unlike the iridescent feathers of its Nicobar pigeon relatives, the dodo's feathers were likely duller, suited to its forested environment where camouflage or visual signaling was less critical. The curly tail feathers, often noted in early sketches, may have served a minor role in display or species recognition, though their exact function remains speculative due to the lack of living specimens for study. Island gigantism also influenced the dodo's overall physiology, including its metabolism and reproductive strategy. As a larger bird, the dodo likely had a slower metabolic rate compared to its smaller, flying ancestors, allowing it to conserve energy in an environment with consistent food availability. Its reproductive habits, though poorly documented, are believed to have involved laying a single large egg in a ground nest, a strategy common among other flightless island birds, like the ostrich or emu. This low reproductive output was sustainable in Mauritius' stable, predator-free environment, where high survival rates of offspring offset the need for large clutches. The dodo's adaptations through island gigantism were not unique in the Mascarene Islands. Its close relative, the Rodrigues solitaire Peziphaps solitaria, underwent a similar evolutionary trajectory on the nearby island of Rodrigues, growing larger and losing flight in response to similar ecological conditions. This parallel evolution highlights the predictability of island gigantism in shaping species in isolated environments. However, it also underscores the vulnerability of such species, as their specialized adaptations left them ill-equipped to handle rapid environmental changes, such as those introduced by humans. The dodo's large size and flightless nature, while advantageous in its native habitat, became liabilities when Mauritius' ecosystem was disrupted. The same traits that allowed the dodo to thrive, its robust body, strong legs, and specialized beak offered little defense against human hunters, invasive species, or habitat loss. The phenomenon of island gigantism, therefore, is a double-edged sword. It enabled the dodo to exploit its environment in remarkable ways, but also tethered it to a specific ecological niche that was easily destabilized. Understanding island gigantism provides critical insight into the dodo's biology and its place in Mauritius' ecosystem. The dodo's physical traits were not random but the result of millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning, driven by the unique conditions of its island home. These adaptations allowed the dodo to flourish in isolation, but they also set the stage for its tragic extinction when humans arrived. The following chapters will explore how the dodo's environment and behavior further shaped its existence, and how its specialized traits ultimately contributed to its downfall. The dodo bird Rhaphis cucullatus thrived in the pristine, predator-free forests of Mauritius, an isolated island in the Indian Ocean that provided an idyllic setting for its evolutionary success. Mauritius, part of the Mascarene archipelago, was formed by volcanic activity approximately 8 to 10 million years ago and remained untouched by humans until the late 16th century. This isolation fostered a unique ecosystem characterized by dense forests, diverse plant life, and a lack of mammalian predators, creating a near-paradisiacal environment for the dodo. The island's lush vegetation, abundant food resources, and stable climate allowed the dodo to flourish for millennia, shaping its behavior, diet, and ecological role. This chapter delves into the intricacies of Mauritius' ecosystem, the dodo's relationship with its habitat, and the ecological dynamics that sustained the species until human arrival disrupted this delicate balance. Mauritius, located approximately 2,000 kilometers east of mainland Africa, was a biodiversity hotspot before human intervention. Its forests were dominated by a variety of endemic trees, including the Tamboulet Coccideroxylon grandiflorum, Ebony diospyros, SPP, and other fruit-bearing species that provided a rich and reliable food source for the dodo. These forests covered much of the island, creating a dense canopy that supported a complex web of life, from insects to birds to reptiles. The absence of large terrestrial predators, such as mammals, was a defining feature of Mauritius' ecosystem, allowing species like the dodo to evolve without the need for defensive adaptations like speed or flight. This predator-free environment was a key factor in the dodo's evolutionary trajectory, enabling it to develop its characteristic large size and flightless nature, as discussed in previous chapters. The dodo's primary food source was the abundant fruit produced by Mauritius trees, particularly the Tamboulet coke, also known as the dodo tree. This species, with its large hard-shelled fruits, is central to a long-standing ecological hypothesis that suggests a mutualistic relationship between the dodo and the tree. The hypothesis posits that the Tamboulet coke's seeds required passage through the dodo's digestive system to germinate effectively, as the bird's gizzard could scarify the seed's tough outer coating. While this idea, proposed in the 1970s, has been debated due to limited evidence and the survival of some Tamboulet coke trees after the dodo's extinction, it highlights the dodo's potential role as a keystone species in its ecosystem. By consuming and dispersing seeds, the dodo likely contributed to the regeneration of Mauritius forests, maintaining the very habitat that sustained it. Beyond fruits, the dodo's diet may have included seeds, nuts, roots, and possibly small invertebrates, such as insects or snails, found on the forest floor. Its robust, hooked beak was well suited for cracking open tough plant material or probing the soil, allowing it to exploit a variety of food sources. The availability of these resources, combined with the island's stable climate characterized by warm temperatures and ample rainfall, ensured that the dodo faced little competition or scarcity. This abundance supported a stable dodo population, as the species could meet its nutritional needs without the need for long-distance foraging or complex social behaviors. The dodo's habitat was not limited to the forest interior, but likely extended to coastal areas and clearings where fruit-bearing trees were abundant. Historical accounts from early European explorers describe dodos being encountered in various parts of the island, suggesting that they were adaptable within the forested landscape. The island's terrain, which included lowland forests, wetlands, and occasional open areas, provided diverse microhabitats for foraging and nesting. The dodo's strong legs, adapted through island gigantism, allowed it to navigate this varied terrain, moving through dense undergrowth or along forest paths to access food. Mauritius wetlands, such as the Mare aux Singes swamp, were particularly significant in preserving the dodo's legacy. This swamp, where many dodo subfossils have been recovered, likely served as a water source or foraging ground for the birds. The swamp's anaerobic conditions helped preserve bones and other remains, offering modern scientists valuable clues about the dodo's anatomy and environment. These findings indicate that the dodo was well integrated into Mauritius' ecosystem, utilizing both forested and wetland areas to meet its needs. The absence of predators shaped not only the dodo's physical traits, but also its behavior within its habitat. Without threats from mammals or large reptiles, the dodo developed a docile, fearless demeanor, a trait that would later prove catastrophic when humans arrived. This lack of fear allowed the dodo to roam freely, foraging without the need for vigilance or rapid escape. Its ground-dwelling lifestyle was further supported by the forest floor's soft, leaf-littered surface, which provided suitable sites for nesting. The dodo is believed to have laid a single large egg in a simple ground nest, likely constructed from leaves and twigs, taking advantage of the forest's sheltered environment to protect its offspring. The dodo's habitat also supported a variety of other endemic species, creating a balanced ecosystem in which the dodo played a central role. Other birds, such as the Mauritius kestrel Falco punctatus and the pink pigeon, Nasinas mayari, coexisted with the dodo, occupying different ecological niches. Reptiles, including giant tortoises and skinks, and a rich insect population further enriched the island's biodiversity. The dodo's interactions with these species, particularly through seed dispersal, likely had cascading effects on the ecosystem, influencing plant distribution and forest composition. The stability of Mauritius' ecosystem was a double-edged sword for the dodo. While it provided an ideal environment for the species to thrive, it also made the dodo highly specialized and dependent on the island's specific conditions. The dense forests, abundant food, and lack of predators created a delicate balance that was easily disrupted by external forces. When European sailors arrived in the late 16th century, bringing with them invasive species and deforestation, the dodo's habitat was rapidly altered, undermining the very conditions that had allowed the species to flourish. The dodo's reliance on Mauritius forests highlights the vulnerability of island ecosystems, where species often evolve in isolation and lack the adaptability to cope with sudden changes. The tambaluk oak and other native trees, for example, faced their own pressures from habitat loss and competition with introduced plants, further disrupting the ecological network that supported the dodo. The loss of these forests not only deprived the dodo of food and nesting sites, but also diminished its role as a seed disperser, potentially impacting the regeneration of Mauritius vegetation. Understanding the dodo's habitat provides critical context for its life and eventual extinction. The pristine forests of Mauritius were more than just a backdrop. They were the foundation of the dodo's existence, shaping its diet, behavior, and ecological role. The interplay between the dodo and its environment underscores the importance of habitat preservation for species survival, a lesson that resonates today as ecosystems worldwide face similar threats from human activities. The following chapters will explore how the dodo's behavior and interactions with humans further defined its fate, and how the loss of its habitat sealed its extinction. The life and behavior of the dodo bird, Rhaphis cucullatus, paint a picture of a creature exquisitely adapted to its unique environment, thriving in the predator-free forests of Mauritius until human arrival disrupted its existence. Despite being described as clumsy or foolish by early European sailors, the dodo was a product of millions of years of evolutionary refinement, with behaviors and lifestyles perfectly suited to the stable, resource-rich ecosystem of its island home. Its slow, deliberate movements, dietary habits, reproductive strategies, and lack of fear toward potential threats were all hallmarks of a species that had evolved in isolation, free from the pressures that shaped the behaviors of mainland birds. This chapter explores the dodo's daily life, foraging patterns, social behaviors, reproductive habits, and ecological role, drawing on historical accounts, subfossil evidence, and comparisons with related species to reconstruct its behavior before its extinction. The dodo's behavior was deeply influenced by the absence of predators on Mauritius, which allowed it to develop a relaxed, almost leisurely lifestyle. Unlike its pigeon and dove relatives, which are often skittish and quick to take flight, the dodo had no need for such vigilance. Its lack of fear, noted by early explorers who described the birds as approachable and unafraid, was a direct result of evolving in an environment devoid of mammalian threats. This docility, while advantageous in its natural habitat, made the dodo an easy target when humans and introduced species arrived, as will be discussed in later chapters. Historical accounts, such as those from Dutch sailors in the late 16th century, often portrayed the dodo as waddling slowly through the forest, seemingly indifferent to human presence. This behavior was not a sign of stupidity, as some early writers suggested, but rather a reflection of an environment where escape or defensive behaviors were unnecessary. The dodo's daily life revolved around foraging for food, which was abundant in Mauritius' lush forests. Its diet primarily consisted of fruits from endemic trees like the Tambala coke, Sideroxylon grandiflorum, ebony, Diospyros spp, and other fruit-bearing species. The dodo's large, hooked beak was ideally suited for cracking open tough, fibrous fruits or digging into the soil for seeds, roots, or small invertebrates like insects or snails. Subfossil evidence, including beak and gizzard remains, suggests that the dodo had a strong digestive system capable of processing hard plant material. Similar to modern seed-eating birds, the dodo's foraging strategy likely involved roaming the forest floor, using its sturdy legs to navigate through dense vegetation and its beak to probe for food. Unlike birds that rely on flight to access food in trees, the dodo's terrestrial lifestyle meant it focused on ground-level resources, though it may have occasionally reached low-hanging branches. The dodo's movement, often described as slow and deliberate, was an adaptation to its energy-efficient lifestyle. With no predators to evade and ample food available, the dodo had little need for rapid or agile movements. Its strong, thick legs, as revealed by skeletal remains, supported its 10 to 20 kilogram body and allowed it to move steadily through the forest. Early European accounts, such as those from the 1598 Dutch expedition led by Admiral Wybrandt van Watwick, noted the dodo's waddling gait, which contributed to its reputation as clumsy. However, this perception likely stemmed from the bird's lack of urgency, rather than any physical inadequacy. In its natural environment, the dodo's slow pace was perfectly suited to conserving energy while foraging in a resource-rich habitat. Social behavior in dodos is less well documented, as historical records provide limited insight into their interactions. However, comparisons with related species, such as pigeons and doves, suggest that dodos may have been relatively solitary or loosely social. Modern pigeons often form loose flocks for foraging or mating, but do not exhibit highly complex social structures. The dodo, with its abundant food supply and lack of predators, likely had little need for cooperative behaviors like group defense or foraging. It may have roamed alone or in small groups, coming together primarily for mating or when food sources were concentrated. The dodo's vestigial wings, too small for flight, may have served a role in visual signaling during social or mating interactions, though this remains speculative due to the lack of direct evidence. Reproduction was a critical aspect of the dodo's life, and its reproductive strategy was shaped by the stable, predator-free environment of Mauritius. Like other flightless island birds, such as the ostrich or emu, the dodo is believed to have laid a single large egg in a ground nest. This low reproductive output was sustainable in an environment where offspring faced minimal threats, allowing high survival rates to maintain a stable population. The dodo's nest was likely a simple structure of leaves, twigs, and other forest debris, placed in sheltered areas of the forest floor to protect the egg from environmental factors. The large egg size, inferred from comparisons with related species, suggests that dodo chicks hatched at a relatively advanced stage, capable of foraging soon after hatching, though they likely depended on parental care for some time. Parental behavior in dodos is poorly understood, but it is reasonable to infer that one or both parents guarded the nest and chick, given the investment in a single egg. The dodo's lack of predators meant that nest defense was less about repelling threats and more about ensuring the egg's safety from environmental hazards, such as heavy rains or falling debris. The incubation period is unknown, but comparisons with large pigeons suggest it may have lasted several weeks. Once hatched, dodo chicks likely grew quickly, supported by the island's abundant food resources, reaching maturity within a few years. This slow but steady reproductive cycle was well suited to Mauritius' stable ecosystem, where population growth did not need to be rapid to ensure species survival. The dodo's ecological role extended beyond its own survival, as it likely played a significant part in shaping Mauritius forests. The dodo tree mutualism hypothesis, discussed in Chapter 4, suggests that the dodo was a key seed disperser for trees like the tablock oak. By consuming fruits and excreting seeds, the dodo may have facilitated the spread of certain plant species, contributing to the forest's regeneration. Even if the tablock oak's dependence on the dodo was overstated, the bird's foraging likely influenced plant distribution and forest composition. Its feeding habits, which involved consuming large quantities of fruit, would have helped maintain the balance of Mauritius' ecosystem, supporting other species that relied on the same resources. The dodo's behavior also included adaptations for coping with Mauritius' climate, which was warm and humid with seasonal rainfall. The bird's plumage, described as grayish or brownish, with a tuft of curly tail feathers, likely provided insulation against occasional heavy rains, while remaining suited to the island's warm temperatures. The curly tail feathers, noted in historical sketches, may have served a minor role in display or species recognition, though their exact purpose remains unclear. The dodo's robust physiology, including a slower metabolic rate compared to its flying ancestors, allowed it to thrive in an environment where energy conservation was more advantageous than rapid activity. The dodo's life and behavior were not static but evolved in response to seasonal changes in Mauritius' ecosystem. During the wet season, when fruit production peaked, the dodo likely had access to a surplus of food, allowing it to build fat reserves. In the drier months, it may have relied more heavily on seeds, roots, or invertebrates to supplement its diet. This flexibility in foraging, combined with the island's consistent resources, ensured the dodo's survival across seasons. Its ability to adapt to these subtle environmental shifts highlights its success as a species within its niche, despite later misconceptions about its supposed ineptitude. The dodo's behavior, while perfectly suited to its isolated habitat, left it vulnerable to the rapid changes brought by human arrival. Its lack of fear, slow movements, and ground nesting habits made it an easy target for hunters and introduced predators, as explored in later chapters. The very traits that allowed the dodo to thrive, its docile nature, energy-efficient lifestyle, and low reproductive output, became liabilities when its environment was disrupted. Understanding the dodo's life and behavior provides a window into its ecological niche and underscores the delicate balance of island ecosystems, where species are finely tuned to specific conditions. The dodo's story is one of adaptation and harmony with its environment, but also of vulnerability to change. Its behavior, shaped by millions of years of isolation, reflects the unique conditions of Mauritius forests and the absence of threats that defined its existence. As we move to the subsequent chapters, we will see how the arrival of humans and their impact on the dodo's habitat and behavior led to its rapid decline, highlighting the fragility of species adapted to such specialized environments. The arrival of European sailors in the late 16th century marked a catastrophic turning point for the dodo bird, Rapus Chuchulatos, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to its extinction within a century. Mauritius, an isolated island in the Indian Ocean, had been a pristine sanctuary for the dodo, free from human influence for millions of years. The dodo's lack of fear toward humans, a trait honed by its evolution in a predator-free environment, transformed from an advantage into a fatal vulnerability. European explorers, primarily Portuguese and Dutch sailors, encountered the dodo during their voyages, and their interactions, driven by curiosity, exploitation, and negligence, disrupted the delicate balance of Mauritius' ecosystem. This chapter explores the historical context of human arrival, the dodo's interactions with these newcomers, the immediate impacts of human activities, and the beginning of the dodo's decline. The first recorded human contact with Mauritius came in 1507, when Portuguese sailors, navigating the Indian Ocean in search of trade routes, briefly visited the island. However, it was the Dutch who established a more consistent presence, starting in 1598, under Admiral Wybrand van Wyk, that had the most significant impact on the dodo. The Dutch named the island after Prince Maurice of Nassau, and saw it as a strategic stopover for their ships en route to the East Indies. The dodo, a large flightless bird that roamed the island's forests, was an immediate curiosity for these sailors, who were unaccustomed to such creatures. Historical accounts from this period, including journals and shiplogs, describe the dodo as a strange, slow-moving bird with a peculiar appearance, often noting its plump body, small wings, and large hooked beak. The dodo's lack of fear toward humans was a defining factor in its interactions with these early visitors. Having evolved in an environment devoid of mammalian predators, the dodo had no instinctual wariness or defensive behaviors. Sailors reported that dodos could be approached easily, sometimes walking directly toward humans out of curiosity or indifference. This docility, described in accounts such as those by Dutch sailor Willem van Westenen in 1602, made the dodo an easy target for capture. Sailors, often in need of fresh provisions during long voyages, found the dodo a convenient source of meat. The bird's size, standing about 1 meter tall and weighing 10 to 20 kilograms, provided a substantial meal, and its inability to flee made hunting effortless. Hunting was one of the earliest and most direct impacts of human arrival on the dodo population. European ships, which often spent weeks or months at sea, relied on stops at islands like Mauritius to replenish food supplies. The dodo, described in some accounts as having tough but edible meat, became a target for crews seeking fresh food. Journals from the Dutch East India Company VOC expeditions, such as those from the 1598 voyage, mention sailors catching dodos in large numbers, sometimes clubbing them or capturing them by hand. While the dodo's meat was not always favored, some accounts described it as unpalatable compared to other game. It was a readily available resource that required minimal effort to obtain. This hunting pressure, though significant, was likely not the primary driver of the dodo's extinction, as the island's population could have sustained limited harvesting. However, it marked the beginning of human-induced stress on the species. Beyond direct hunting, the arrival of humans introduced a host of indirect threats that would prove far more devastating, as explored in subsequent chapters. European ships brought with them animals such as rats, pigs, and monkeys that were either intentionally introduced as livestock or accidentally released as stowaways. These invasive species, discussed in detail in Chapter 7, would wreak havoc on the dodo's reproductive cycle and food resources. Additionally, the establishment of temporary settlements and the beginnings of deforestation, covered in Chapter 8, started to alter Mauritius' pristine forests, eroding the habitat that the dodo depended on. The combination of these factors, hunting, invasive species, and habitat disruption, created a perfect storm that the dodo, with its specialized adaptations, was ill-equipped to survive. The cultural and scientific perceptions of the dodo were also shaped by these early human encounters. European sailors, unfamiliar with the evolutionary processes that produced the dodo, often viewed it as an oddity or a freak of nature. Sketches and descriptions from the period, such as those by artist Joris Eustace Schlerel from the 1601 Dutch expedition, depict the dodo with exaggerated features, emphasizing its large beak and small wings. These accounts, while valuable for reconstructing the dodo's appearance, often carried a tone of mockery, describing the bird as clumsy or foolish. Such characterizations, rooted in European biases and a lack of understanding of island ecology, contributed to the dodo's lasting reputation as an awkward, ill-fated creature. In reality, the dodo's behavior was a testament to its successful adaptation to a predator-free environment, where traits like docility and slow movement were advantageous. The arrival of humans also marked the beginning of Mauritius' transformation from an untouched ecosystem to a colonial outpost. The Dutch, in particular, saw the island as a resource to be exploited, not only for food, but also for its ebony forests, which were valuable for trade. The establishment of small settlements, such as the one at Fort Frederick Hendrick in the early 17th century, brought increased human activity to the island. While these settlements were initially temporary, they set the stage for more permanent changes, including deforestation and the introduction of agriculture, which would further degrade the dodo's habitat. The dodo, which had thrived in isolation for millennia, was suddenly exposed to a rapidly changing environment that it was not adapted to handle. The dodo's interactions with humans were not limited to hunting. Some accounts suggest that dodos were captured alive and brought aboard ships, either as curiosities or potential food for the journey. A few dodos were reportedly transported to Europe, though most did not survive the voyage. One notable exception is a dodo said to have been exhibited in London in the 1630s. As mentioned in historical records by Sir Hamon Lestrange, these live captures, while rare, highlight the fascination that the dodo inspired among Europeans, who saw it as an exotic marvel from a distant land. However, these attempts to transport dodos likely had little impact on the species' overall population, as the primary threats remained on Mauritius. The human arrival also had ecological ripple effects that extended beyond the dodo. Other native species, such as the Mauritius giant tortoise and various endemic birds, faced similar pressures from hunting and habitat changes. The dodo's extinction was part of a broader pattern of biodiversity loss in the Mascarene Islands, where species like the Rodriguez solitaire met similar fates. The introduction of foreign animals and plants began to reshape Mauritius' ecosystem, disrupting the delicate balance that had sustained the dodo and its contemporaries for millennia. The dodo's lack of fear, a trait that had served it well in its isolated habitat, became its greatest liability in the face of human arrival. This behavioral vulnerability, combined with the direct and indirect impacts of European exploration, marked the beginning of the dodo's decline. While hunting alone did not drive the dodo to extinction, it was a significant stressor that compounded the more severe threats of invasive species and habitat destruction. The arrival of humans was a pivotal moment, transforming Mauritius from a sanctuary into a battleground where the dodo, despite its evolutionary success, could not compete. Understanding the impact of human arrival provides critical context for the dodo's extinction. The dodo's story is not just one of a curious bird meeting curious explorers. It is a stark illustration of how human activities can disrupt even the most stable ecosystems. The following chapters will delve deeper into the specific mechanisms of the dodo's decline, including the devastating effects of invasive species and habitat loss, which together sealed the fate of this iconic species. The introduction of invasive species to Mauritius by European sailors in the late 16th and early 17th centuries was a primary driver of the dodo bird. S. Rhaphis cuculitus, rapid decline, arguably more devastating than direct human hunting. While the arrival of humans, as discussed in Chapter 6, initiated the dodo's troubles through hunting and habitat disturbance, the introduction of non-native animals such as rats, pigs and monkeys unleashed a cascade of ecological disruptions that the dodo was ill-equipped to withstand. These invasive species preyed on dodo eggs, competed for food resources, and altered the island's ecosystem, severely impacting the dodo's reproductive success and survival. This chapter explores the mechanisms by which invasive species contributed to the dodo's extinction, the ecological vulnerabilities of island species, and the broader implications for Mauritius' biodiversity. The dodo's evolutionary history, shaped by millions of years of isolation on Mauritius, left it uniquely vulnerable to invasive species. As described in earlier chapters, the dodo evolved in a predator-free environment, developing traits such as flightlessness, a docile demeanor, and ground nesting habits. These adaptations were ideal for Mauritius' pristine forests, where the absence of mammalian predators ensured high survival rates for dodo eggs and chicks. However, the introduction of foreign animals by European sailors, particularly the Dutch, who established a presence on the island starting in 1598, disrupted this delicate balance. The dodo, with no natural defenses against predators or competitors, faced an unprecedented threat that its evolutionary history had not prepared it to counter. One of the most significant invasive species was the shiprat rattus, which likely arrived as stowaways on European vessels. These rats were highly adaptable, prolific breeders, capable of producing multiple litters per year, and opportunistic feeders. On Mauritius, they found an abundance of food, including the dodo's eggs, which were laid in simple ground nests with minimal protection. The dodo's reproductive strategy, as discussed in Chapter 5, involved laying a single large egg, a low-output approach that relied on high chick survival rates in a predator-free environment. Rats, however, could easily locate and consume these eggs, significantly reducing the dodo's reproductive success. A single rat could destroy an entire clutch in minutes, and with no defensive behaviors to protect their nests, dodos were powerless to stop this predation. Pigs, introduced intentionally by sailors as a source of food, posed an even greater threat. These animals were released onto the island to establish feral populations, allowing sailors to harvest them during future visits. Feral pigs, however, became highly destructive, foraging widely across Mauritius forests. They rooted through the forest floor in search of food, consuming not only dodo eggs, but also roots, seeds, and fruits that the dodo relied on. This competition for food resources likely reduced the dodo's access to its primary diet of fruits, such as those from the tambala coke tree, as discussed in Chapter 4. Additionally, pigs' destructive foraging habits damaged the undergrowth where dodos nested, further exposing eggs and chicks to predation or environmental stress. Historical accounts from Dutch settlers, such as those from the early 17th century, note the presence of feral pigs, which quickly established large populations due to the island's abundant resources and lack of natural predators. Macaque monkeys, likely introduced by Portuguese or Dutch sailors as pets or provisions, were another invasive species that impacted the dodo. These agile, omnivorous animals could climb trees and access food sources that the dodo, a terrestrial bird, could not. Monkeys competed directly with dodos for fruits, particularly those in the forest canopy, reducing the availability of this critical food source. Like rats, monkeys were also capable of raiding dodo nests, consuming eggs, or even young chicks. Their intelligence and adaptability made them formidable competitors, further straining the dodo's resources. While historical records are sparse on the exact role of monkeys, their presence on Mauritius is documented in early accounts, and their ecological impact on other island species suggests a significant contribution to the dodo's decline. The combined effect of these invasive species was a dramatic disruption of the dodo's life cycle. The dodo's low reproductive rate, with only one egg per nesting season, meant that even a small increase in egg predation or chick mortality could have catastrophic consequences for population stability. Unlike mainland birds that might produce multiple eggs to offset predation, the dodo's reproductive strategy was not resilient to such pressures. The loss of eggs to rats and monkeys, coupled with competition for food from pigs and monkeys, created a bottleneck that prevented the dodo population from recovering from even moderate losses. This vulnerability is a hallmark of island species, which often evolve in stable, predator-free environments and lack the adaptability to cope with sudden ecological changes. The impact of invasive species extended beyond the dodo to Mauritius' broader ecosystem. Native plants, such as the tambala coke and ebony trees, faced browsing pressure from pigs and monkeys, which damaged young saplings and reduced forest regeneration. This disruption likely compounded the dodo's food scarcity, as the availability of fruit-bearing trees declined. Other endemic species, such as the Mauritius giant tortoise and various birds like the pink pigeon, also suffered from predation and competition, contributing to a broader wave of biodiversity loss in the Mascarene Islands. The Rodriguez solitaire, a close relative of the dodo on the nearby island of Rodriguez, faced similar pressures from invasive species, leading to its extinction around the same period. Historical evidence, while limited, supports the significant role of invasive species in the dodo's decline. Dutch records from the early 17th century, such as those from Fort Frederick Hendrik, mention the presence of pigs and other introduced animals, noting their proliferation on the island. These accounts, combined with ecological studies of island species, suggest that invasive species were a primary driver of the dodo's extinction, likely more impactful than direct hunting by humans. While sailors hunting, as discussed in Chapter 6, reduced dodo numbers, it was the relentless predation and competition from invasive species that prevented the population from recovering. The introduction of invasive species also had long-term ecological consequences that persisted beyond the dodo's extinction. The loss of the dodo as a seed disperser, as hypothesized in the dodo tree mutualism with the tambala coke, may have altered forest composition, reducing the regeneration of certain tree species. The proliferation of invasive animals reshaped Mauritius' ecosystem, favoring adaptable, generalist species over specialized endemics, like the dodo. This shift highlights the cascading effects of invasive species, which can disrupt entire ecosystems by targeting vulnerable species and altering food webs. The dodo's vulnerability to invasive species underscores a broader lesson about island ecology. Species that evolve in isolation are often highly specialized and lack the resilience to cope with sudden environmental changes. The dodo's ground nesting habits, low reproductive rate, and dependence on specific food sources made it an easy target for predators and competitors that it had never encountered in its evolutionary history. This vulnerability is not unique to the dodo. Countless other island species, from the moa of New Zealand to the flightless rails of the Pacific, have faced similar fates following human colonization and the introduction of non-native species. The impact of invasive species on the dodo also serves as a cautionary tale for modern conservation. Today, invasive species remain a leading threat to biodiversity, particularly on islands. Efforts to protect endangered species, such as the Mauritius kestrel or the pink pigeon, often focus on controlling invasive predators like rats and feral cats. These modern conservation strategies draw directly from the lessons of the dodo's extinction, emphasizing the need to manage invasive species to preserve fragile ecosystems. The dodo's story highlights the importance of preventing the introduction of non-native species and mitigating their impacts through active intervention. Understanding the role of invasive species in the dodo's decline provides critical insight into the mechanisms of its extinction. While human hunting initiated the dodo's troubles, it was the introduction of rats, pigs, and monkeys that delivered the most significant blow, disrupting the bird's reproduction and food supply. This ecological onslaught, combined with habitat destruction explored in Chapter 8, created an insurmountable challenge for a species adapted to a stable, predator-free world. The dodo's story is a stark reminder of the far-reaching consequences of human actions, particularly the introduction of invasive species and the need for vigilance to protect vulnerable ecosystems. The destruction of Mauritius' pristine forests through human settlement and activities in the late 16th and early 17th centuries was a critical factor in the extinction of the dodo bird Rapus chutrulatus, compounding the pressures of hunting an invasive species. As discussed in previous chapters, the dodo was exquisitely adapted to the dense, resource-rich forests of Mauritius, relying on the island's abundant fruit-bearing trees and sheltered nesting sites to sustain its population. However, the arrival of European sailors, particularly the Dutch, who established a presence starting in 1598, brought about rapid deforestation as forests were cleared for agriculture, infrastructure, and resource extraction. This loss of habitat drastically reduced the dodo's food supply and nesting opportunities, undermining the ecological foundation that had supported the species for millennia. This chapter explores the causes and consequences of habitat destruction, the dodo's dependence on Mauritius forests, and the broader ecological impact on the island's biodiversity. Mauritius, before human intervention, was a lush, forested island, characterized by dense canopies of endemic trees such as the Tamblecoque sideroxylon, grandiflorum, ebony, Diospyros spp, and other fruit-bearing species. These forests, as detailed in Chapter 4, provided the dodo with an abundant food supply, primarily fruits, as well as suitable nesting sites on the forest floor. The dodo's evolutionary adaptations, its large size, flightlessness, and specialized beak were tailored to this environment, where food was plentiful and predators were absent. The stability of this ecosystem allowed the dodo to thrive, with its low reproductive rate and energy-efficient lifestyle sustained by the island's rich resources. However, the arrival of humans and their need for land and resources initiated a rapid transformation of Mauritius' landscape, disrupting the delicate balance that the dodo depended on. The primary driver of habitat destruction was the establishment of settlements and agricultural activities by European colonists, particularly the Dutch. After their initial visits in 1598, the Dutch saw Mauritius as a strategic stopover for their East India Company (VOC). Ships leading to the establishment of temporary and later semi-permanent settlements, such as Fort Frederick Hendrick in the early 17th century. These settlements required cleared land for housing, storage, and agriculture to support the growing number of sailors and settlers. Forests were cut down to create open spaces for crops, such as sugarcane and other introduced plants, which were intended to sustain the colony and provide provisions for passing ships. This deforestation was documented in Dutch records, which described the clearing of large tracts of forest to accommodate these needs. The extraction of ebony wood was another significant factor in habitat destruction. Mauritius ebony trees were highly valued in Europe for their dense, dark wood, used in furniture and shipbuilding. The Dutch, recognizing the economic potential, harvested ebony extensively, further reducing the island's forest cover. Historical accounts from the early 17th century, such as those from VOC expeditions, note the export of ebony as a key activity, with large quantities shipped to Europe. This exploitation not only diminished the dodo's habitat, but also disrupted the ecosystem's balance, as ebony trees were a component of the forest structure that supported the dodo's food sources and nesting sites. The loss of forest cover had a direct and profound impact on the dodo's survival. The dodo's primary food sources, fruits from trees like the tambaluke oak and ebony, became scarcer as these trees were felled or their regeneration was disrupted. The dodo, with its specialized diet and inability to fly to alternative food sources, was particularly vulnerable to this reduction in resources. Unlike adaptable species that could switch to new food sources or relocate, the dodo's terrestrial lifestyle and dependence on specific trees tethered it to the diminishing forests. The loss of fruit-bearing trees likely led to nutritional stress, weakening the dodo population and reducing its ability to reproduce and recover from other pressures, such as hunting and invasive species predation. Nesting sites were equally affected by deforestation. The dodo, as discussed in Chapter 5, laid a single large egg in a ground nest, typically constructed from leaves and twigs in sheltered forest areas. The clearing of forests removed these sheltered microhabitats, exposing nests to environmental hazards like heavy rains or trampling by introduced animals, such as pigs. The destruction of the forest floors, leaf litter and undergrowth, which provided camouflage and protection for nests, further increased the vulnerability of dodo eggs and chicks. With a low reproductive rate, the loss of suitable nesting sites was particularly devastating, as even a small reduction in successful hatching could significantly impact population stability. The introduction of agriculture also introduced new plants that competed with native species, further altering the dodo's habitat. Crops like sugarcane, which were planted in cleared areas, were not part of the dodo's diet and offered no ecological benefit to the species. These introduced plants often outcompeted native trees and shrubs, reducing the regeneration of fruit-bearing species that the dodo relied on. The shift from diverse, native forests to monoculture plantations disrupted the complex web of interactions that sustained Mauritius' ecosystem, including the dodo's role as a potential seed disperser. As hypothesized in the dodo tree mutualism with the ecological impact of habitat destruction extended beyond the dodo to other native species. The Mauritius giant tortoise, various endemic birds like the pink pigeon, and reptiles such as skinks faced similar pressures from habitat loss. The removal of forest cover disrupted their food sources and habitats, contributing to a broader decline in biodiversity. The Rodrigues solitaire, a close relative of the dodo on the nearby island of Rodrigues, also suffered from habitat destruction, leading to its extinction around the same period. This pattern of loss highlights the vulnerability of island ecosystems, where species are often highly specialized and dependent on specific habitats. Historical records from Dutch settlers provide evidence of the scale of deforestation. Reports from the early 17th century describe the clearing of forests for settlements and the harvesting of ebony, with large areas of Mauritius transformed within decades of human arrival. These accounts, while focused on the economic benefits of resource extraction, inadvertently document the rapid alteration of the island's landscape. Archaeological evidence, such as pollen records from Mauritius swamps, further supports the decline of native forest species and the rise of introduced plants during this period, corroborating the historical narrative of habitat destruction. The combined effects of habitat destruction, invasive species Chapter 7, and hunting Chapter 6 created a synergistic threat that the dodo could not withstand. While invasive species like rats and pigs directly targeted dodo eggs and food resources, habitat destruction amplified these pressures by reducing the availability of fruits and nesting sites. The dodo's specialized adaptations, its dependence on specific trees, ground nesting habits, and low reproductive rate made it particularly susceptible to these changes. Unlike mainland species that might migrate or adapt to new habitats, the dodo was confined to Mauritius, with no alternative ecosystems to retreat to. The destruction of Mauritius forests also had long-term ecological consequences that persisted beyond the dodo's extinction. The loss of native trees reduced the island's biodiversity, altering forest composition and limiting the regeneration of species like the tambala. The introduction of non-native plants and animals further shifted the ecosystem toward one dominated by generalist species at the expense of specialized endemics. This transformation underscores the cascading effects of habitat destruction. which can reshape entire ecosystems by disrupting the interactions between species. The dodo's extinction due to habitat destruction offers a poignant lesson for modern conservation. Today, deforestation remains a leading threat to biodiversity, particularly in tropical regions and island ecosystems. Efforts to protect endangered species, such as the Mauritius kestrel or the echo parakeet, often focus on habitat restoration and the removal of invasive species, drawing directly from the lessons of the dodo's demise. Reforestation projects on Mauritius, initiated in the 20th and 21st centuries, aim to restore native forests and support surviving endemic species, reflecting an understanding of the critical role that habitat plays in species survival. The dodo's dependence on Mauritius forests highlights the fragility of island ecosystems, where habitat loss can have devastating consequences for species with specialized ecological niches. The rapid deforestation driven by human settlement was a key factor in the dodo's extinction, stripping away the resources and shelter that the species needed to survive. This chapter illustrates how habitat destruction, combined with other human-induced pressures, sealed the dodo's fate, setting the stage for its final disappearance. As explored in Chapter 9, the dodo's story serves as a stark reminder of the importance of preserving natural habitats to protect vulnerable species and maintain ecological balance. The extinction of the dodo bird Rhaphis cucullatus by the late 17th century stands as one of the most poignant examples of human-induced biodiversity loss, marking the tragic culmination of a series of pressures that overwhelmed this unique species. By the 1660s, the dodo had largely vanished from Mauritius, with some accounts suggesting a few individuals may have persisted into the 1690s. The rapid decline, occurring within a century of human arrival, was driven by a synergistic combination of direct hunting, invasive species, and habitat destruction, as detailed in previous chapters. The dodo, exquisitely adapted to its isolated, predator-free island environment, was ill-equipped to withstand these rapid changes, underscoring the fragility of island species. This chapter examines the timeline of the dodo's extinction, the cumulative impact of human activities, the final sightings, and the broader implications for understanding species vulnerability in the face of environmental disruption. The dodo's extinction was not a single event, but a gradual process driven by multiple, overlapping. As discussed in Chapter 6, the arrival of European sailors, primarily Portuguese and Dutch, in the late 16th century introduced direct hunting, with the dodo's lack of fear and flightlessness making it an easy target for crews seeking fresh meat. While hunting reduced dodo numbers, it was the introduction of invasive species, detailed in Chapter 7, that delivered a more severe blow. Rats, pigs, and monkeys preyed on dodo eggs and competed for food resources, disrupting the bird's reproductive cycle and reducing its access to fruits like those from the tamblecoke tree. Habitat destruction, explored in Chapter 8, further compounded these pressures, as deforestation for settlements, agriculture, and ebony extraction stripped away the forests that provided the dodo's food and nesting sites. Together, these factors created an ecological crisis that the dodo, with its specialized adaptations and low reproductive rate, could not survive. The timeline of the dodo's extinction is pieced together from historical records, primarily Dutch accounts from the 17th century. The last widely accepted sighting of a living dodo occurred around the 1660s, with a frequently cited report from 1662 by Dutch sailor Volkert Everts, who described capturing dodos on an islet off Mauritius. This account, recorded during a shipwreck incident, suggests that dodos may have persisted in small, isolated populations in less accessible areas of the island. Other reports from the 1660s, including those from Dutch settlers at Fort Frederick Hendrick, mention dodos but with decreasing frequency, indicating a rapidly declining population. Some historians and naturalists, based on less reliable accounts, propose that a few dodos may have survived into the 1690s, possibly in remote forest pockets. For example, a 1688 account by English traveller Benjamin Harry references a possible dodo sighting, though its accuracy is debated due to vague descriptions and the lack of corroboration. By the late 17th century, the dodo was effectively extinct, with no confirmed sightings after the 1660s. The exact date of its extinction is difficult to pinpoint, as historical records from Mauritius are sparse and often incomplete. The absence of dodos in later Dutch and French records, particularly after the establishment of more permanent settlements in the 1670s, supports the conclusion that the species had disappeared by this time. The rapid pace of extinction within roughly a century of human contact highlights the devastating impact of human activities on a species that had thrived for millennia in isolation. The Dodo's extinction was driven by a combination of factors that interacted synergistically to overwhelm its population. Direct hunting, while significant, was likely less impactful than the ecological disruptions caused by invasive species and habitat loss. The dodo's reproductive strategy, as discussed in Chapter 5, involved laying a single large egg in a ground nest, a low-output approach that relied on high chick survival rates in a predator-free environment. The introduction of rats and monkeys, which preyed on eggs, and pigs, which consumed both eggs and food resources, drastically reduced the dodo's reproductive success. With only one egg per nesting season, even a small increase in predation could prevent population recovery. The loss of forest habitat, driven by deforestation for agriculture and ebony harvesting, further exacerbated this crisis by limiting the dodo's access to fruits and suitable nesting sites. The dodo, confined to Mauritius with no alternative habitats, had nowhere to retreat as its environment collapsed. The ecological vulnerabilities of the dodo were rooted in its evolutionary history, as explored in Chapters 2 and 3. Its large size, flightlessness, and docile demeanor, products of island gigantism and a predator-free environment, made it uniquely susceptible to human-induced changes. Unlike mainland species that might adapt to new predators or migrate to alternative habitats, the dodo was a highly specialized species, tethered to Mauritius forests and ill-equipped to cope with rapid environmental shifts. This specialization is a common trait among island endemics, which often evolve in stable, isolated ecosystems and lack the resilience to withstand external pressures. The dodo's extinction is thus a classic example of the vulnerability of island species, a pattern seen in other mascarene species like the Rodrigues solitaire, and in island fauna worldwide such as the moa of New Zealand and the flightless rails of the Pacific. The broader ecological impact of the dodo's extinction extended beyond the loss of a single species. As a potential seed disperser, as hypothesized in the dodo tree mutualism with the Tambalacoke Chapter 4, the dodo likely played a role in maintaining Mauritius' forest ecosystem. Its disappearance may have disrupted forest regeneration, affecting the distribution of certain tree species and altering the island's vegetation structure. The loss of other native species, such as the Mauritius giant tortoise, compounded these ecological changes, leading to a broader decline in biodiversity. Pollen records and archaeological evidence from Mauritius, such as those from the Mera Osanges swamp, indicate a shift in forest composition during the 17th century, with native species declining and introduced plants becoming more prevalent, reflecting the cascading effects of human activities. Historical records and artifacts provide the primary evidence for the dodo's extinction. Subfossil remains, discovered in the Mera Osanges swamp in the 19th and 20th centuries, have been crucial for reconstructing the dodo's biology and confirming its disappearance. These bones, including skulls, beaks, and leg bones, offer no evidence of dodos surviving beyond the 17th century. Contemporary accounts, such as sketches by artists like Joris, Eustache, Laurel, and written descriptions by Dutch sailors, cease mentioning live dodos after the 1660s, further supporting the timeline of extinction. The lack of preserved specimens, only a few body parts, such as a head and foot, were kept in European collections, reflects the rapid nature of the dodo's disappearance, which left little time for systematic documentation. The dodo's extinction was not an isolated event, but part of a broader wave of biodiversity loss in the Mascarene Islands. The Rodrigues solitaire, a close relative, met a similar fate, as did other endemic species like the Mauritius red rail and various reptiles. This pattern of loss highlights the susceptibility of island ecosystems to human activities, particularly when multiple stressors, hunting, invasive species, and habitat destruction act in concert. The dodo's rapid extinction, occurring within a few decades, underscores the speed with which human impacts can devastate specialized species, particularly those confined to small, isolated habitats. The dodo's extinction also had cultural and scientific repercussions. By the 18th century, the dodo had become a subject of fascination in Europe, with its rarity fueling interest among naturalists. Early accounts and sketches, while often inaccurate, kept the dodo's memory alive, contributing to its status as a cultural icon. The phrase, "dead as a dodo," coined in the 19th century, reflects its enduring symbolism as a marker of irretrievable loss. Scientific studies in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly following the discovery of subfossils, deepened our understanding of the dodo's biology and its place within the Columbidae family. As confirmed by genetic analyses in the 21st century, these studies have also sparked speculative discussions about extinction, though the lack of viable DNA and the complexity of recreating an extinct species make such efforts theoretical at best. The dodo's extinction serves as a powerful lesson for modern conservation. The rapid loss of this species illustrates the devastating impact of human activities on fragile ecosystems, particularly islands, where species often lack the adaptability to cope with rapid change. Today, conservation efforts in Mauritius focus on protecting surviving endemic species, such as the Mauritius kestrel and pink pigeon, through habitat restoration and invasive species control. These efforts draw directly from the dodo's story, emphasizing the need to preserve habitats and manage human impacts to prevent further extinctions. The dodo's extinction also highlights the importance of early intervention, as the window to save a species can close rapidly once multiple stressors are introduced. The dodo's disappearance by the late 17th century was a tragedy rooted in its ecological vulnerabilities and the relentless pressures of human activities. The combination of hunting, invasive species, and habitat destruction created an insurmountable challenge for a species that had thrived in isolation for millennia. The dodo's extinction, while a singular event, is emblematic of the broader challenges facing biodiversity in the face of human expansion. As we explore the dodo's legacy in Chapter 10, we will see how its story continues to inspire conservation efforts and serves as a reminder of our responsibility to protect the natural world. The extinction of the dodo bird, Rhesus cucullatus, in the late 17th century left an indelible mark on science, culture, and conservation, transforming this once obscure island species into a global symbol of biodiversity loss and human impact on the natural world. Though the dodo vanished from Mauritius by the 1660s, with possible stragglers into the 1690s, its story has endured through historical records, subfossil remains, and cultural references, offering profound lessons about the fragility of ecosystems and the responsibility to protect them. Preserved through skeletal fragments, early sketches, and modern scientific advancements, the dodo continues to inspire research, conservation efforts, and discussions about humanity's role in shaping the environment. This chapter explores the dodo's lasting legacy, its contributions to science and culture, the lessons drawn from its extinction, and its ongoing relevance in an era of accelerating environmental change. The dodo's legacy began to take shape even before its extinction was fully recognized. Early European accounts, such as those from Dutch sailors in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, documented the dodo's peculiar appearance and behavior, often with a mix of curiosity and mockery. Sketches by artists like Joris Ustinch, Lerel, and written descriptions in shiplogs, such as those from the 1598 Dutch expedition led by Admiral Wybrand van Warwijk, provided some of the earliest records of the dodo, preserving its image for posterity. These accounts, while often biased or exaggerated, kept the dodo's memory alive in Europe, where it became a subject of fascination among naturalists. By the 18th century, as the dodo's absence from Mauritius became apparent, it gained a reputation as a lost curiosity, with rare preserved specimens like a head and foot in European collections, fueling scientific interest. The discovery of dodo subfossils in Mauritius Mare Osange's swamp in the 19th century marked a turning point in understanding the species. These remains, including skulls, beaks, and leg bones, provided concrete evidence of the dodo's existence and allowed scientists to reconstruct its anatomy and lifestyle. Studies of these subfossils, particularly in the 19th and 20th centuries, clarified the dodo's place within the Columbidae family, confirming its close relation to pigeons and doves, especially the Nicobar pigeon Caloenus nicobarica. Advances in genetic analysis in the 21st century further refined this understanding, using DNA extracted from subfossils to map the dodo's evolutionary lineage. These scientific efforts have dispelled early misconceptions about the dodo as a clumsy or poorly adapted creature, revealing it as a highly specialized species perfectly suited to its island environment. The dodo's cultural legacy is equally significant, transcending its biological existence to become a symbol of extinction and obsolescence. The phrase, "dead as a dodo," popularized in the 19th century, encapsulates its status as a marker of irretrievable loss, used widely in literature and everyday language. Lewis Carroll's inclusion of a dodo in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland 1865 cemented its place in popular culture, portraying the bird as a quirky, endearing character that organizes the caucus race. This literary depiction, while fictional, introduced the dodo to generations of readers, reinforcing its image as a curious relic of a bygone era. In modern media, the dodo appears in films, cartoons, and books, often as a humorous or tragic figure, further embedding it in the global imagination. The dodo's extinction has become a powerful cautionary tale for conservation, highlighting the devastating impact of human activities on fragile ecosystems. As detailed in chapters 6 to 9, the dodo's rapid decline was driven by a combination of hunting, invasive species, and habitat destruction, all introduced by European sailors in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. The dodo's vulnerabilities, its lack of fear, low reproductive rate, and dependence on Mauritius forests made it particularly susceptible to these pressures, a fate shared by other island species like the Rodriguez solitaire and the Mauritius red rail. This pattern of loss underscores the fragility of island ecosystems, where specialized species often lack the resilience to cope with rapid environmental changes. The lessons from the dodo's extinction have directly informed modern conservation efforts, particularly in Mauritius and other island ecosystems. The loss of the dodo spurred efforts to protect surviving endemic species, such as the Mauritius kestrel falco punctatus and the pink pigeon Nesina mayeri, which faced similar threats from habitat loss and invasive species. Conservation programs in Mauritius, initiated in the 20th century and continuing today, focus on habitat restoration, reforestation, and the control of invasive species like rats and feral cats. For example, the establishment of protected areas like Black River Gorges National Park and reforestation projects aim to restore native forests, providing habitats for endangered species. These efforts draw directly from the dodo's story, emphasizing the need to preserve ecosystems and manage human impacts to prevent further extinctions. The dodo's extinction also highlights the broader issue of biodiversity loss, a pressing global challenge in the 21st century. The rapid decline of species worldwide, driven by deforestation, climate change, and invasive species, echoes the dodo's fate, making its story a call to action for conservationists. Organizations like the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust, which operates in Mauritius, use the dodo as a symbol to raise awareness about the importance of protecting endangered species. Educational campaigns and ecotourism initiatives often feature the dodo, leveraging its iconic status to engage the public in conservation efforts. The dodo's legacy thus serves as a reminder of the consequences of unchecked human activities and the urgent need to protect vulnerable ecosystems. Scientific interest in the dodo has also sparked discussions about de-extinction, the theoretical process of reviving extinct species through genetic engineering. Advances in biotechnology, such as CRISPR and ancient DNA sequencing, have fueled speculation about the possibility of bringing the dodo back to life. Researchers have extracted partial DNA from dodo subfossils, raising questions about whether the species could be reconstructed using closely related pigeons as a genetic template. However, de-extinction remains highly speculative, facing significant technical and ethical challenges. The lack of complete dodo DNA, the complexity of recreating a viable population, and the absence of Mauritius' original forest ecosystem make such efforts impractical for the foreseeable future. Moreover, de-extinction debates often cite the dodo as a case study, highlighting the need to prioritize the conservation of living species over attempts to resurrect those already lost. The dodo's legacy extends to its role in shaping ecological and evolutionary theory. Its extinction has contributed to our understanding of island biogeography, particularly the vulnerability of endemic species to human-induced changes. The dodo's story has informed research on the island rule, which describes how species on islands evolve distinct traits, such as gigantism or flightlessness, as discussed in Chapter 3. The dodo's rapid demise also underscores the concept of ecological cascades, where the loss of a single species, like the dodo as a potential seed disperser, can alter entire ecosystems. These insights have guided conservation strategies worldwide, emphasizing the importance of preserving ecological interactions to maintain biodiversity. In Mauritius, the dodo remains a national symbol, featured in art, literature, and tourism. The dodo is depicted on coins, stamps, and souvenirs, reflecting its cultural significance and its role in raising awareness about conservation. Museums, such as the Natural History Museum in Mauritius, display dodos and reconstructions, educating visitors about the island's ecological history and the importance of protecting its remaining biodiversity. The dodo's image is also used in global conservation campaigns, serving as a universal symbol of the need to prevent further extinctions. The dodo's legacy is not without controversy, particularly regarding its historical portrayal. Early European accounts, as noted in Chapter 6, often described the dodo as clumsy or foolish, a stereotype that modern science has debunked. The dodo's adaptations, its large size, flightlessness, and docile behavior were highly effective in its native environment. As discussed in Chapters 2 and 5, this shift in perception reflects a broader trend in conservation science, which seeks to understand species within their ecological context, rather than through human biases. The dodo's story challenges us to reconsider how we view failed species, recognizing their evolutionary success and the external factors that led to their demise. The dodo's extinction also raises ethical questions about humanity's role in the environment. The rapid loss of the dodo, driven by human activities within a century, highlights the power of human actions to reshape ecosystems, often with unintended consequences. This realization has fueled the growth of the conservation movement, which seeks to mitigate human impacts through sustainable practices and environmental stewardship. The dodo story encourages reflection on our responsibility to protect biodiversity, not only for ecological reasons but also for cultural and ethical ones. As the loss of a species diminishes the richness of the natural world, in the 21st century, the dodo's legacy continues to resonate as biodiversity faces unprecedented threats. The lessons from its extinction about the dangers of invasive species, habitat destruction, and overexploitation remain relevant as we confront global challenges like climate change and deforestation. The dodo's story serves as a call to action, urging us to protect ecosystems before more species are lost forever. By preserving habitats, controlling invasive species, and promoting sustainable development, we can honor the dodo's legacy and ensure that future generations inherit a world rich in biodiversity. The dodo's story is one of beauty, tragedy, and hope. Its extinction is a stark reminder of the fragility of life, particularly in isolated ecosystems, but its enduring legacy inspires efforts to protect the natural world. Through science, culture, and conservation, the dodo continues to teach us about our impact on the environment and the importance of acting to preserve it. As we face